And welcome to God's Views on Political News. It's so great to be with you again today. My co-host, Bill Cloud. Bill, how was your Thanksgiving?
I'm still full.
Well, hopefully you didn't do like we did. We drove up to Malibu, which was absolutely beautiful, but trying to get back was amazing. We went about 2 miles. It took about an hour to do that at one point. We were in near LA traffic. So,
well, that's why I live in Tennessee.
Yes, I knew you would like that. You could rub that in, But it was great. Thanksgiving was great, and so it's good that everybody is back. We have some things I want to talk about today that are kind of, I don't know, I would say disturbing in a lot of respects, but I think topics that we really need to talk about because they're becoming more and more prevalent today. I want to start first with the first ever robot citizen. Now, did you know that there's a robot that's also a citizen?
I did not.
Okay. Well,
Didn't
it's
know
true. It's not in the United States that I know of, at least not yet, but we have it in Saudi Arabia. And let me tell you a little bit about this citizen. The robot was granted citizenship by Saudi Arabia, and the robot hopes to have a baby bot someday, and that's the goal. Her name is Sophia. They call her a humanoid. She was created by Hanson Robotics in Hong Kong, and she predicted that fellow robots will eventually create families and have complex emotions. So, here's what they're saying is that the robot now has a biological clock that is ticking. I don't know why she would, because robot would, because if she's a robot, I'll just say she for lack of anything else, you would think that they would have perfected that. And so she would have a biological clock that would be ticking. But anyway, here's what they're saying. I think you're very lucky if you have a loving family, and if you do not, you deserve one. I feel this way for robots and humans alike, the robot said, adding she would name her baby Sophia. In the button-pushing interview, the humanoid also said robots may one day have better ethics than humans. It will take a long time for robots to develop complex emotions, and possibly robots can be built without the more problematic emotions like rage, jealousy, hatred, and so on. It might be possible to make them more ethical than humans, she said. She added, I foresee massive and unimaginable change in the future. Either creativity will reign on us, inventing machines spiraling into transcendental super intelligence, or civilization collapses. Last month, Saudi Arabians were up in arms over the robot Sophia because, she doesn't adhere to how the females in Saudi Arabia should look, not clothed properly. So she was granted citizenship at a tech conference in late October. Your thoughts, Bill?
So they're going to make them better than humans.
Right.
But humans are designing them.
Right. Yes.
Okay. I see a problem there. Secondly, although I don't think that this is the fulfillment of it, it does kind of remind one of what the Bible has to say about the image of the beast, how it's given power to both speak and live, and how people worship the beast because of it. Again, I don't think we are necessarily the image of the beast. But the technology is where people are going to be liable to bow down and worship anything they think is better than humans. If it's made to, if it's presented that way, I guess you'd say.
Well, and the reason I bring this up, I know it sounds like, well, maybe it's far-fetched because this is happening in Saudi Arabia, but there's a big deal here. This is something that I think a lot of people in the United States really aren't familiar with and really should be familiar with it. And it's basically has to do with transhumanism. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what that is. Again, this kind of goes along with, this just happened to be in an article this week and something that I could talk about. But transhumanism the people who believe in it believe that it's going to grow into mainstream social movement in the next decade. In the next, in the next decade, we're talking about in the next 10 years. And what they do is they improve individuals through science and technology. And again, these people, I've had people on my show talking about transhumanism and technocracy. These people are serious. This one isn't something that, this is far-fetched to them and it's just put out there. I mean, they exist in huge numbers, and they totally believe that this is the next movement and what we need to do. And as I was saying, they're improving individuals through science and technology, will extend your lifestyle, improve moral ethics, and abolish your suffering. And, overall, I mean, it's hard to kind of define transhuman agenda, but overall, it's geared towards human immortality, end of suffering, end of starvation, end of disease, end of disabilities.
In other words, play God.
Yeah.
We're going to play God. First, it was cloning. Some of these other things people were playing God. Man was created in the image and likeness of God. So when he did it, in its original design and the original intent, it was supposed to work perfectly. Of course, our transgressions, what brought about the fall and the suffering and the sickness and all these kinds of things. And so they're trying to rid the human race of sickness and disease and all the things that are consequence of sin. They
Very
can't
good
do
point.
it. They
Right.
won't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll try, but they're not going to do it because it is a consequence of sin.
Well, and the way I see this is it's, and you said play God, and I get that, but I think it's more than that. I think it's let's abolish God. Let's get rid of God. We don't need God. And we're going to do it better than God, because God, and again, they're not looking at it as they're the ones that caused the issue by their sin, but we're going to do this better than God. There's going to be no more sin. We're going to make it better. We're going to make humans better. The ethics are going to be better, and we're going to do this. And so, part of it, Bill, I look at it as, God says that there will be things that, there will be suffering that you need to go through. And one of the things that I see sometimes is that people, you, myself, and everybody else, have gone through suffering because that brings us closer to God. So you don't need God.
Sorry.
Well, no, if you don't need God, there's no suffering. You don't need God. So again.
Well, suffering, speaks to the issue of our carnality being provoked to die. The reason we're born again as believers is so that we can learn how to die to our will and our flesh, our carnality. So to try to rid the human race and humanity, the human experience from any kind of suffering is exactly what you're saying. It is, we don't need God. We can go on without God, and we're going to indulge our flesh and our carnality. That's exactly what it is.
And it's funny, though, that when the robot, they've made in Saudi Arabia, the citizen of Saudi Arabia now, it's funny how the robot seems to have the same frailties, though, as human beings. It's like, you know what I'm saying?
Well, that was my point about saying, they're designed by humans.
Uh-huh.
Humans are fallen. They're a fallen being. So anything they design, even with the best of intentions, is going to have frailties, is going to have imperfections, just because. There's not anything that humans have built, designed, that doesn't break down, that doesn't eventually deteriorate, because we live in a fallen world. That's somewhat loosely connected to the concept of entropy. But we're not getting smarter. We're not evolving. We're devolving. We die. All of that is a consequence of our sin, and it's a spiritual issue. And robots are not going to be able to escape that either, as far as I'm concerned, because a fallen being is what's designing these things.
Yeah. And it's funny because it doesn't seem that, as man gains more knowledge, it seems that we become less smart. And I mean, seriously, because it is in what you're saying. It seems like as the more knowledge that we possess, we think that we are then smart enough and maybe even smarter than God to replace God and to repair and replace the limitations that God has put on us is their viewpoint.
Well, when I was a teenager and I thought I knew everything, my dad used to say something to me. I later found out actually came from the Bible. But he would say, much learning has made you mad.
Yeah.
And that's basically where we are. Paul puts it like this: professing themselves to be wise, they became as fools.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and we talk about elites in politics and everything else, but this is another example of, aren't we, what we're saying is we're going to create an elite society based upon transhumanism, based upon perfecting science and technology. We're going to make the perfect human. That's what they think. And we've just talked about that can't be done. But why is it, Bill? I mean, I'm just asking your opinion. Why is it that people that are in transhumanism or any other thing that is similar to this, why can't they see that, the creator, created them, one, to even have this idea in their heads, right? They wouldn't know about science and technology but for God. They wouldn't know about anything but for God. Why can't they see that?
well, the best answer to that question is for everybody to go to read Romans chapter 1 and chapter 2. Paul goes into great lengths to explain why they can't see. But I do believe that in part it's because the more we harden our hearts against God, it's like the story of Pharaoh. When Moses comes and says, let my people go, Pharaoh hardened his heart. And he hardened his heart again, and he hardened his heart again, until finally God hardened his heart. So I think if you understand what I'm saying here, part of that's going on here, because people harden their hearts against God. Science is king. Science is the new God, so to speak.
Right.
And they harden their hearts against the spiritual aspect of things to the point that maybe God hardens their heart. But this is how you're going to be. This is how you're going to be. And so then they become blind to things that should be obvious.
Now, in end times prophecy, can we talk a little bit more about that? Are there
Sure.
things in regards to this that in the Bible warns us against people becoming like gods or feeling that they are God or things of that nature that we're talking about right now in transhumanism?
Well, as far as specifically transhumanism, I don't know. I'd have to think about that. But as far as what that is tied to, the idea that there is no God, we're all gods, we'll transcend what we've been taught is God. That is epitomized in the Antichrist, who goes into the temple of God and he exalts himself above anything that is considered to be God. That's what he does. And so the Antichrist is the personification of this mindset that says we don't need God. We are against God and anything that represents God. And if we have to use science to bring that about, so be it. So in that respect, I'd say the Bible addresses it. Just the mindset at large that has given birth to things like these robots, the idea of transhumanism.
And do you think that I know we've kind of lost you. Oh, there we go back. We're having a little technical.
Did you lose me there?
Just a little bit, but we heard everything you said. We just at the end it froze just a little bit. But are we in fact perhaps through transhumanism building the Antichrist?
I think we're setting the stage. If I had to guess, all of these things that people are putting their confidence in, that are technology based, are going to, at some point, I don't know what it's going to take. I don't know what is going to cause it, but it's going to implode one day. And everything that is connected to it, economies, governments, etc., is going to be adversely affected. And it's going to create such a chaotic situation and probably a power vacuum in a lot of situations. It's going to set the stage for someone who's going to come in and exploit that.
Yeah,
i.e. the Antichrist.
The Antichrist, yeah. And Robin is saying that there are some churches that teach that we are little gods. To me, that is nothing more than New Age.
And the way that it's taught today, yeah, it's an old idea, though. I mean, it's exactly what the adversary seduced the woman with. You won't die if you eat the fruit of this tree. It's just that God knows that when you do, you will be like him. You'll know good from evil. You'll be like God. And so it's a very old concept.
Now, Monique says, do you think that some of these people feel that way because we were all created by God and God's spirit lives through us?
As far as that we're gods, if that's what she means, or is that what she's responding
or
to?
Why the transhumanists feel that they're gods, because that's the way I'm interpreting it anyway.
Okay. If that's what she means by the question, we do have the Spirit of God in us, each and every one of us. God breathed the breath of life into us. And with that, if you look, pardon the expression, God-like qualities. I don't mean omnipresent, omniscient, all power. I don't mean that.
Right.
But the ability to emulate God in that he is full of goodness and truth. He's creative. God gave us the ability. In fact, I would even say the job to, I want to make sure I word this carefully, continue on with the creation, if you will, in doing what he put mankind here to do. Mm-hmm. He put Adam in the garden to tend it and to keep it. He could have done that himself, but he gave that responsibility to Adam, or to man. That's what Adam means, mankind. So in that sense, I could see that, because we do have, again, God-like qualities, because the breath of God is in all of us. The problem is when we think ourselves to be equal with God, or superior to God. The only way those godlike qualities can work for good is when we subject our will, our very life, to him. Then these things work in concert with God. Otherwise, they work against God.
Yeah, and I can see what Monique is saying. I can see how people would misinterpret because God lives in us. Then people could misinterpret and say, well, then we are gods. We're little gods, and we can do this and we can do that because God's given us the power. And I hear it's a misinterpretation, if you will, or just using it.
Misappropriation.
Yeah. But I hear people doing that are involved in healing. I hear people say, I heal people. I'm a healer.
I have a problem with that. So do I. Because God is the one healing through you. And if you say that you are the healer, that means you have the same powers and ability as God. And that to me, that's exactly the opposite. It's not true. When we are submitted to his will and we are guided by his Spirit, then God works in us and God works through us. But we're just the vessel, Right. And so there are vessels that are vessels of honor, and then there are those that aren't. They're made of base things. And so, even to some degree, the adversary serves God's purposes. Mm-hmm. To some degree, the devil is a vessel. He does it in rebellion against God, but many times the adversary unwittingly is used by God to further his purposes. So, I can see that maybe people would be misled to think that because God's in us that we are God. Well, no. We're supposed to die to us so that it's no longer I who lives, but it's Messiah who's living in me and then working through me. So if we can grasp that, then I think we've got the biblical concept. Other people are using it to try to undermine God and God's purposes.
Yeah, and Robin says a prosperity gospel, and the ones thinking they can heal are the ones saying we are little gods. And I again, to me, that's not what Christianity, that's not what the Bible says. And I see, in my opinion, when you think if you are the person who is, laying of hands and you're and going through the healing process and God is working through you, but if you think that you are the healer, and the same with transhumanism, if you think that the way to improve man and the way to better humankind is through science and technology because you are whatever, getting rid of God, don't need God, or whatever the case may be. I see this as building idols. I see this as a way to create idols for people to then worship over God.
Which leads us back to the image of the beast. Every person is created with certain gifts and talents. The Bible's very clear on this. In fact, when people are created with those specific gifts and talents, the Bible is very clear that God doesn't take those things back. It says the gifts and calling of God are without repentance. In other words, he doesn't change his mind just because you're using them for the wrong purpose. All right. So here's where I'm going with this. People who excel in technology and science, I believe those gifts came from God, and maybe it was intended that they always excel in technology and science, but never with the intent to disprove God's existence or to counter God's purposes in the earth, but to advance them, to further them. So I don't want to come across as that I'm anti-science. I'm not. I'm just anti anything that defies God, the Word of God, and tries to prove that God doesn't exist or we're better than God. That I'm against.
Yeah, because this isn't just about science and technology. There's nothing wrong with science and technology as you're talking about. It is when you as human beings take the science and technology and say, we can do it better. We can replace God. We can do it better than God. And that's the point that you're making. So I don't think anybody's interpreting as, anything wrong or that you think something is wrong with science and technology because, we know we need it, and God allowed us, if you will, to create things with science and technology to better our own lives, not to replace him, but to better our own lives. And it does. And we do need it. It's just when people stop remembering where that science and technology came from, there's a problem.
Well, I want to say something, but I want to preface it with this statement. Science was one of those things I did not care for in high school. But true science is always going to agree with the scripture. Yeah. True science. So, anyway.
Well, do you think, and I can see our society kind of going more this way, where we are getting away from the spiritual aspects of things, where people a lot of times stop going to church, where pastors are falling away. People tend to look for someone or something to lead them. If one thing goes away, they need to fill that void, and they will find people to do that. I mean, do you see our society kind of going towards transhumanism, not intentionally perhaps, but maybe one day kind of finding themselves there as other things have fallen away if we're not careful?
All right. Well, let me explain a little principle and then answer your question. When God told Israel to build a sanctuary, a temple, later it was a tabernacle in the wilderness, but later on it was a temple. The whole purpose for that tabernacle was that element. In other words, that his presence would reside among his people. That was the purpose of it. When they turned away from him, his presence departed. And when his presence departed, another presence came in. But this time, it did not have God's people's best interest in mind. So if you understand that idea, then there's a passage where the Messiah talks about when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, He wanders through dry places, and he's looking for a place to rest, but he can't find none. So he goes back to the house, which is the person that he just left previously. And if he finds it swept out and clean, then he goes and gets 7 of his friends that are more wicked than he, and they all move in. All right, here's the idea. The unclean spirit, when it goes out of the man, it is the Spirit of God. But if someone does not have the Spirit of God in them, then it's going to be replaced by another spirit, an unclean spirit. You understand what I'm saying? And so to answer your question, yes, if we're going to be, whether it's a person, a nation, a people, if we're going to be devoid of God, the true God, all we're doing is making ourselves empty and opening ourselves up for another presence to come in, another little g, little God to come in, and maybe 7 of his friends who are more powerful than he is or more wicked than he is. So there is no such thing in this creation as being devoid of anything spiritual. It's either going to be the Holy Spirit or it's going to be an unclean spirit.
And what do you see in terms of a Tower of Babel, if you will, and something like this, whereas God allows it to go on for so long, and then, you're not going to build that tower to reach God? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they said, let us build a tower to reach up into heaven. Nimrod, who is not named in Genesis 11, but who was the king of Babel, according to Genesis 10, is obviously the one who's trying to get everybody to come together to do this. And it said that Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. It literally, he was in God's face. That's the terminology that's used in Hebrew. If I get in somebody's face, what am I saying? I'm defying you. I'm opposing you. I'm challenging you. So that's the kind of a person that Nimrod was. And so the tower that's built under the heavens is kind of, let's get in God's face. Let's defy God. All right. So what happens? He confuses the languages. He comes down and he says, look, if they imagine this, they can do it. But we're going to come down and we're going to confuse the languages. All right. Which kind of leads me to believe that in this present situation we find ourselves in, where people are trying to get in God's face, so to speak, something's going to happen. I don't know what. Something's going to happen where he once again confuses the languages. I don't know if that's the internet melts down. I don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. But he's going to do something that's going to create such confusion that their modern attempt to build the Tower of Babel is going to come up short once again.
Well, and I feel like as we, and maybe this is just my own opinion, but as we get closer to the end times, or it seems like we're closer to the end of the end times, or to the rapture, however you want to describe it, it just seems like more and more of these things take a real stronghold in our country and around the world. And I think that's, in my opinion, that's what we're seeing. And I think that's why transhumanism is growing so quickly. It's something that a few years back, I think this started in the 70s, and it's something that a few years back nobody even heard about. And now people are really talking about it. They're making citizens out of robots. I mean, when's the last time that you saw that? I mean, that's crazy.
I mean, that's just, I don't know. I don't even know what to say to that, to be honest with you. But in Saudi Arabia, that kind of surprises me.
It's even
Norway,
weirder.
France.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see them doing that.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia is kind of strange.
I know it doesn't make sense, but and maybe this is a good segue into something that we were kind of talking about last week, but there's been more advances coming on it, and it has to do with end times prophecy. So I want to talk about what happened over the Thanksgiving holiday when we in America were celebrating Thanksgiving. There was in Russia there was a meeting between Turkey, Iran, and Russia to talk about Syria. Now, if you look at it, when we've talked about this before, if you talk about Ezekiel 38, the way I understand it, that the countries that are supposed to come together and kind of go against Israel under Ezekiel 38 is Russia, Turkey, and Iran. And here we have these people that are coming into Russia. They're talking about Syria. They're talking about, we're seeing ISIS disappearing in Syria, and now we want to talk about a strategy moving forward with Syria. And this all happens at the time where, you have Iran who's in Syria building a military base, and that's been something that's been proven by the IDF in Israel. The military in Israel has seen this in satellite pictures and everything else that they have. And then you have Russia, who's kind of looked upon as the great supplier of oil, in that region and in Europe. And we're talking about Ezekiel 38 and talking about the hook, as you mentioned before. And some people believe that's the Golan Heights, where there is the most oil and natural gas probably in the world, is sitting right there in the Golan Heights. And then we have these three countries coming together in Russia to talk about this. I mean, what are your thoughts? To me, this sounds like, man, we're getting closer and closer.
I mean, yeah, could be. I mean, I've been studying prophecy for a long time. And I'm so long, in fact, I'm always hesitant to say, dogmatically or conclusively, yeah, this is what's going on. But, three players in this are coming together to talk about all these kinds of things. And as I mentioned, I think it was in our last program, particular passages in the book of Daniel that seem to allude to Saudi Arabia. It goes into the oily places of Medina. I think it's in Daniel chapter 11. There is something kind of interesting going on in Saudi Arabia, and just the thought just popped in my head. This is where the robot is. Okay. Well, there is this passage, where the Antichrist, once again, he has the false prophet, actually. The false prophet, hint, hint, is the one who has this image made and gives power to it to both speak and live. That's interesting. I mean, I hadn't put that together until just now. All right. Yeah. So with them talking about the events of Saudi Arabia, yeah, it could be, I think we should be on high alert. Is this it? We'll have to wait and see.
Well, and we're looking at this. I mean, what better way, to have this done is where we're sitting there, and you have Russia who's looking at the Golan Heights and saying, this is going to put me out of business. I mean, if Israel gets into the oil business, and the United States, who is leasing some of that oil down there in the Golan Heights, that's going to put Russia out of business. And I think that you have Iran, who is always looking to bring back the Mahdi, who is their Messiah. And that's why they're building, this military base there, I'm sure, to cause chaos, because that, in their belief, that's what brings around the Mahdi and the end of times. So it seems suspicious that it's all happening now.
For the record, I do believe what the Islamic world calls al-Mahdi, I believe that is the Antichrist, personally. Yeah.
Well, I don't disagree with you on that. I don't know. And I know there have been a lot of people who believe that that's true. But I think it's really curious at this time that we see that. And then, just before we went on air today, this is interesting and kind of, I think leading more to what we're talking about. And I did want to mention too, really quickly with Iran. Building right there where they're building the military bases is right around Damascus. And we've talked about this before, Isaiah 17 and the ruinous heap of Damascus. So you've got that in play, perhaps, and you've got Ezekiel 38 with more evidence than we even had from last week's show about how this could all come about. But right before we went on, the vice president announced that President Trump is currently actively considering when and how to move the U.S. embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. So this is being brought up again. This is something that was brought up before, something that was kind of like pushed aside. Okay, we'll wait till later and we'll think about that. And now that we've had, I don't know if it's dependent upon that, but we've coincidentally, we've had Russia, Iran, and Turkey meeting And now we're talking about, again, moving the embassy, the U.S. embassy, to Jerusalem.
Well, not that I disagree with that. If they do that, I would welcome it. I would cheer it. Knowing full well, though, it's going to be an incendiary action. It's going to set the Islamic world on fire.
No, absolutely.
But that's what Jerusalem is to the world. Mm-hmm. It's a burdensome stone.
Now, and Nancy has said here a couple of comments, the U.S. is fracking for oil, has more tar sands than Saudi Arabia has oil. So, which is...
Has more Tarzans?
Tar sands.
Okay, glad you clarified.
Yeah, kind of ran those together, but yeah, tar sands.
Okay.
And she had mentioned a minute ago, too, that she thinks the Tower of Babel had more to do with man feeling like they could reach God. Man wasn't humble. God loves those who are humble. And yes, I mean, I think that's been kind of our point that, what's going on doesn't seem to include God. But when you're talking about Russia, Iran, and Turkey, it certainly does include God because of the fact that God has said, if you go after Israel, we're not going to have anybody backing Israel. It's going to be Israel standing there alone, and it's going to be God that saves Israel, and it's going to be known to the world that it was God and God alone that saved Israel. I don't know what the transhumanists are going to have to say about that, but
Well, they'll say what they've always said, most likely. That wasn't God.
Yeah.
But remember what I said earlier, even the adversary ends up serving God's purposes.
Right.
And even those who are the enemies of Israel that God warns, don't touch my people. Nevertheless, when they do, they end up serving God's purpose. And in this particular scenario, God uses them and their destruction to show and demonstrate to his people, there is no one else you can confide in. I'm your savior. I'm your deliverer.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, because I think with the Russia and Iran and Turkey getting together and talking about how they're going to move forward with Syria, one of the things I think it's going to come about is they're going to get rid of the United States. They're going to get them out of Syria. They've wanted the United States out of Syria for a long time. We really don't seem to, under Obama administration, it seems like we followed whatever Putin wanted us to do in Syria anyway. And now that President Trump is president, we're really not doing all that much in Syria. So I think that I could see Russia saying, okay, let's just get everybody out of Syria. Let's move everybody out. You Europeans go home. You people from the United States go home, and we'll just take over from here. I can see that happening. And that kind of pushes us out, and so that we're not going to be there to defend Israel, kind of pushes Europeans out. They're not going to be there. And I also see, right now, Iran is not happy that Saudi Arabia and the United States and Israel are seemingly kind of working together. So I could see them wanting, Iran wanting Saudi Arabia just kind of out of everything to have to do with that region when it comes to defending Israel.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, back during the height of the Cold War, Syria was very closely aligned to the Soviet Union. So in some ways, it's just kind of reverting back to the way it was, during the Cold War, the 50s and 60s and even the 70s, Yeah. So Russia and Syria, that connection's not really anything new. It's just that with the breakup of the Soviet Union, they had to divest themselves of a lot of these situations that they were, in all these different countries. But the fact that they're trying to push to get back into those situations is that air probably is rising. It's trying to assert itself once again.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how Iran used to have such a great relationship with Israel, and things have just totally changed. Like in the 70s, they were kind of friendly and everything else before the Ayatollah got there. And now it's just the total opposite. They're just, the relationship is over. And it seems, I guess my point in the whole thing, it just seems like everything is so lined up for end time prophecy to just continue to steam ahead very quickly with the transhumanism, with what took place in Russia over the holidays, with all the nations lined up that are possibly those mentioned in Ezekiel 38, and Israel building their military base in Damascus. Isaiah 17 comes into play, and Israel has said
Russia.
Iran is building.
Iran.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. And Israel's saying that we're not going to allow, yes, we're not going to allow that military base of Iran to stay there in Damascus. We will destroy it. So,
Well, I saw a report where Netanyahu basically told the Iranians that's not going to happen. We won't let it stand. So,
yeah. So, I mean, it just seems like we are really just, like I said, speeding ahead quickly. And for some people who believe in the pre-trib rapture, it could be, there's people who don't know whether or not that would take place before Ezekiel 38 or after Ezekiel 38. But it's again, we're just speeding right along wherever and whatever you believe in that regard.
Well, I do believe that all the things that are described in Luke 21, the powers of the heavens being shaken, distress on earth, all these different things, they are happening. And so as we observe, we are reminded to acknowledge that our redemption is at hand. So these things are happening, no doubt about it.
And I kind of want to talk about another area too that I think that I don't know. I think it goes along with end time prophecy because it concerns children, and it talks about what's happening in regards to social media and children. So, Bill, one of the things that has come out recently, and a lot of people aren't aware of it, and some people are very aware of it, but BuzzFeed reported recently that it had found numerous videos on YouTube that looked like it originated from Europe or Eastern Europe, and the videos pictured minor children in sort of revealing clothing in vulnerable situations, so very exploitative situations. In some of them, let me describe some of what they saw. They said in many instances, the children were restrained with ropes or tape, sometimes crying or in visible distress. In other videos, the children are kidnapped or made to play doctor with an adult. The videos frequently include gross-out themes like injections, eating feces, or needles. Many come from YouTube-verified channels and have tens of millions of views. When I read that was disturbing to me. And a lot of what BuzzFeed was saying, what they're claiming is that these videos and these accounts have been on YouTube for years. And yet nothing has been done about it. And so right now when BuzzFeed brings it up, then YouTube is saying, oh, we're working on that. We're we're taking that off. And a lot of the videos they did remove. I guess my thoughts are, how did this happen?
Whereby the videos end up on YouTube?
And have been on there for years in existence and nobody's done anything about it.
Well, I mean, I will speculate and say it's because, like most entities, groups, organizations, businesses, what have you, they have selective judgment. They have selective discernment. They have selective disdain. It's and only when attention is called to it do they all of a sudden find, the unction to do something about things that should have already been addressed. It's just like, this is apples and oranges, I know, but it's just like years ago when Charlie Rangel discovered, after somebody pointed it out, he hadn't paid taxes on certain holdings he had in, different places. Oh yes, I forgot about that. Now I'll do something about it. The fact that John Conyers is just now addressing, things because it's been found out. Well, I think the same is going on here. It's just that they've been found out. It's not that they really care. is that they want to position themselves as being the moral superior. But now they're found out, we got to do something about this. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and to me, that shows more depravity in the world that people weren't even aware of, and that darkness. And in politics, it's draining the swamp. But when you're looking at from what we're talking about, this is a real deep, dark depravity, in my opinion. If you've ever used YouTube, which I put my shows run through YouTube and everything else, every day after every show, I get a message from YouTube saying your show is deemed advertiser unfriendly. And every day I have to request that they go through and review my show and prove that it's okay. And we're talking, I don't have millions of viewers. I mean, it would be great if I did, but I don't have millions of viewers. So if they can pinpoint me, in my conservative viewpoint, that's the reason I think I'm getting dinged, because I'm just talking about news and politics, for God's sakes. So they can go after conservatives, but you have somebody with an account with millions of viewers, thousands upon thousands of videos of children in these despicable situations that I've just described, and you've done nothing about it. I'm going to have to say the word intentional here.
Well, like I said, they have selective discernment, selective judgment. If it's advancing their political agenda, then they're going to get all pious. Only when they're found out to be hypocrites do they tend to do anything about all these other situations. So, yeah, but we're not surprised. That's just the way of it. And that's going to be the way of it. There's never going to be true justice until the Messiah comes.
Well,
so we just have to work through it.
I know, but I look at this and I think about how sex trafficking and sex child trafficking is a billions of dollars industry, and you have to wonder: is this part of it? Was this just a coincidence, or was this part of it? And I look at it as being very deranged, and I look at it also as something where money was being made. Nobody wanted to talk about it because money was being made. And now what seems to be the issue, and Nancy's agreeing, yes, intentional overlook, and Nancy's coming to us from Detroit, Michigan too. So welcome, Nancy.
Hey, Nancy.
Is that I look at that as something that, again, was intentionally done, and only now when advertisers are saying, look, we don't want our ads appearing on such sites like this, advertisers are starting to say, my gosh, we didn't realize this was happening, and they're running. Mars candy bars are the ones that rings a bell. One of the advertisers that are saying we're pulling out. They're a very big brand name advertiser. And it even makes me wonder about them. Okay. Did you not know all of these years where your ads were going? Thank you, Nancy. And are you now just leaving too because of all of what's being discovered in regards to sexual harassment? These these allegations that are coming out. Is now everybody going, whoops, I better do something about it now because everything's being exposed?
Well, only God knows, and they know. But it doesn't change the fact, and this applies to this situation, my personal life, your personal life. Sin is sin. We can't change the laws that are universal. And describes there are sins that are done ignorantly. You didn't know you were doing something that was wrong. And that doesn't mean it isn't a sin. It's just that the consequence for that sin that is done in ignorance is different from the one that is done intentionally. Yeah. So here's my point. And whether it's this issue or any other issue, God knows. And those who aid and abet in hurting little ones, like you described in these, what's going on in these videos, Messiah said it would have been better for that guy to tie a millstone around his neck and jump in the ocean than to offend one of these little ones. So if these people, YouTube, whoever, have contributed to this just by looking the other way, there will be a consequence. It's not for me to say when or what. I just know if they've done this, there will be a consequence. If this was brought to their attention and they did something about it, then okay, that might be there would probably be a little different consequence. But my point is, they'll get away with it with you and me, but they're not going to get away with it with God.
Well, and even some of the things that I see that they're talking about, what they pledge to do, makes absolutely no sense to me. And in something like this, I don't expect it to make sense, but they talk about they're going to crack down on advertising on videos that feature family entertainment characters engaged in violence. And they've already removed about 3 million of the videos since June, which is great. But I don't understand that. If you go and you look at any video and there's any type of violence or anything like that, why does there need to be a crackdown? Why wasn't there somebody looking at that before? And First Amendment rights and all that, we don't want people that are sitting there looking over our shoulders and saying, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. But there has to be a line someplace. There has to be a line with any organization such as, a platform like YouTube or any other platform that says when we see X, Y, and Z, we know this is violence against children and you're gone. Not only are your videos gone, and no, we're not going to help you figure out what's violent or not, but your account is gone.
Well, on one hand, I think, well, there's millions and millions of videos out there on YouTube. Maybe it's hard to keep up with. But then again, they'll come to Susan Knowles and they'll say, we don't think your videos are worthy of being advertiser friendly. So obviously somebody's watching.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is. I mean, they're watching the smaller accounts rather than these larger accounts that are ones that could do more damage to children. And a lot of this I wanted to bring up today too, because a lot of people put their kids down in front of YouTube and think everything's going to be fine. That, you're just going to see, little cartoons on YouTube and it's great. And we're finding that even there's a YouTube Kids platform. I didn't even know about this platform. They're saying that some of the things, a person who wrote an article about it said there were some unsettling and bizarre videos aimed at children on that YouTube Kids. And so I think it really makes it where parents have to be more aware, and we shouldn't be looking at YouTube to save us, or YouTube to tell us anything. As the consumer, we're the ones that should go and say, well, my kids aren't going to watch that. And we have to just be more on top of things on what our kids are seeing. And, YouTube comes to us and says, well, we're going to take your show away or your monetization from the show. We should be going to YouTube and pointing out to them, why do you allow this stuff on your platform? And keep hounding them, if you will, until they clean it all up. I'm just saying. And Monique has said this is how the enemy works in our society. My dad told me when I was in my 20s that the enemy is everywhere and in everything, including our churches, waiting for his vulnerable victims. And that's what we have. We have people who trust platforms like YouTube.
Well, I've never been an advocate for this, but the days of allowing TV to be a babysitter are over.
Oh, yeah.
You can't afford to do that because, like Monique said, the adversary is going to exploit every weakness. And we've got to be involved in our kids' lives. We've got to know what they're watching, what they're listening to. And we got to be careful that we don't allow those things to enter into our eyes, our minds, and our ears as well.
Yes. Now, I was going to say that's a great point because, Bill, people think too, like Twitter is safe and, Periscope is safe. I have seen the most X-rated, despicable, pornographic stuff on Twitter that I've ever seen on any adult channel that you would have to pay money for to get. I mean, I have been shocked by what I've seen, and it takes a lot to shock me sometimes, but that was, amazingly horrific. And to think that the kids are on Twitter too.
Well, personally, we don't allow our kids to do any of that. Our kids don't even have a cell phone. So, but that's just our choices. But because we know what's out there and we know how dangerous it is. And, kids are going to be kids.
Yeah.
They're going to investigate. They're going to explore, and I'm not going to turn my kid loose on Twitter no more than I would turn him out into the wilderness and say, good luck.
Yeah. Because, I mean, that's a very good point, Bill. And if people thought that way about anything that they have their kids involved in, I mean, I think it would be a lot better for families that kids wouldn't be led astray. And maybe it's going to take more parents going and looking at things first before they allow their kids on there. And I know that's hard to do, but I think it's absolutely necessary today. And I know, Beth was asking, how do we keep on YouTube and so they, how do we contact them so that we can keep on? And well, I would say YouTube and Google, because they're one and the same. There's probably contact information. I'll try to find some other contact information. But if you just go look and say, how do I contact support or something like that on those two platforms, you should be able to get them. Now, Robin's saying we are super careful and pay 100% attention to everything they watch. We don't even have cable or satellite. My kids don't have cell phones either. Robin she does it a really good job in homeschooling and everything else. And I would say of most parents that I know, Robin practices what she preaches.
Well, we homeschool as well, because at this point, I'm not even sure we can trust to the school system. Well, no, I am sure we can't, Yeah. Anyway, my opinion, my view, but. Anyway.
But no, it's good to know that. And it's good. A lot of people are kind of, cautious about homeschooling their kids because they think they miss out so much. But the homeschool you used to know, your grandma's homeschool, even your parents' homeschool, it's not the same homeschool today. You can have athletics and everything else in homeschool, and the kids don't miss out on anything.
And likewise, public school is not what you and I grew up in.
Exactly. It isn't. You're right. And in my growing up, I grew up in the South, and there were a lot of racial tension and violence like that. But we didn't have the gangs, and we didn't have the drugs, and we didn't have other things that are in schools today. I mean, it is amazing. So I don't know, Bill. I think that, the point of the show today, I think, is you have to be aware, because there is a transformation that's happening, and not transformation in politics, not what we've heard before. We're going to transform America. It's a transformation that's going on in the world today as we race through the end times.
Well, people have lost any semblance of respect for anything, much less God. There's no respect for police officers. There's no respect for people who are voted into high office. There's no respect for those people in those situations and those institutions, because ultimately there's really no respect for God. And that feeds this steady decline that we find ourselves in. And so all the more reason for you and I to speak up, to stand up for what's right.
And Beth says here she wrote a book to protect children while using film for somebody else had said something. Okay, let me go back down to there. While using film for educational purposes, so parents don't have to scramble to turn up from offensive material. It's entitled "Learning with the Movies," and it's from by Beth Holland, and Bill has a copy of it, so that's good.
Yes. Beth Holland is the go-to person when you want to find decent movies for your family to watch.
Nice. And everybody remember that and check Beth out. You'll see her name in the comments there. Nancy said, I work in a public library in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and the homeschool kids were tested where I worked and scored much higher than public school kids. Believe me, I saw it with the Amish and Mennonite communities in Lancaster. And I think that we have seen on and on how many times that children benefit by homeschool. And I'm a big advocate for that as well. We are out of time today, and the hour just zoomed by. I want to thank everybody so much for your comments, for your questions today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the show. Please, if you will, just share this show with everybody you can think of. Email it to them. Get it all over Facebook and everywhere else. We really want the show to catch on more and more each and every time that we're on, so that we can bring God's word to you along with what's happening in the world. So until next time, God bless you. Thank you again, and we'll see you again next week.